I think that something that most athletes have is a feeling going into a race of anxiousness, nervousness, or excitement, right? And so a lot of this leading in weeks prior is because of just how pivotal of an event it is. Welcome to ART,
the Adventure Race Training Podcast.
I'm Nick Herf.
And I'm Chelsey Magness.
And with years of coaching experience and formal education in human performance, we've helped numerous athletes to achieve their goals and increase their self-efficacy. My background comes from formal graduate level education, coaching a variety of collegiate teams and professional endurance athletes. My athletes range from everyday racers to NCAA All-Americans and multiple world record holders.
And I'm the captain of Team Bend Racing. I've devoted the past 2.5 decades of my life to adventure racing, competing at the top level for over a decade. But I draw a lot of my coaching and training philosophy on my years as a top-level climbing, acrobatics, and highlining coach, essentially trying to minimize the learning curve on notoriously difficult sports. I've also coached a few world champions, so together, Nick and I have some great successes.
Ultimately, we're here to share our knowledge and expertise with the community to help you prepare for your next big race. Our goal is that these conversations provide valuable insights to elevate your adventure.
All right, let's get started.
Welcome back, everybody. Jason and I are here, and Chelsey's going to hop in a little bit to offer a different perspective. This is part 2 of our ARWS Championship 2025 recap. Part 1 is a different episode. We focused a lot more on the race overall and kind of physical performance and preparation. On this one, we want to focus more on the mental side, which doesn't get a lot of talk or conversation in the AR communities. So with that said, Jason, do you want to hop in and talk a little bit about what do you see as some of the mental preparation going into the race, before the race?
It's fascinating to me because, in all the talk around adventure racing, especially expedition adventure racing, I think there is a lot of mention of the mental side of things. But often when there's, failings or successes, it's really easy to just attribute that to the physicality, right? So whenever somebody gives the elevator speech about adventure racing, they're like, the mental part is super important. But like you said, there's not a lot of kind of discrete conversations around what that looks like for various athletes, what the pitfalls can be, and how to do it effectively. Really, it's the mental side of things that I think makes the bigger difference in these races than the physicality. Because at some point, the physicality kind of goes down to this baseline, right? And then it does become a race of what teams, what athletes can mentally stay sharp and competitive. And what we used to talk about in our team early when we were kind of defining our kind of new team culture half a decade ago was, we think about these, the mountain biking, the trekking, the navigation, all these elements that makes a good adventure racing team. But the one thing that we realized we were lacking as a team was this skill of competitiveness. And not the skill of competitiveness for the first 24 hours, but the skill of competitiveness on day 3, on day 4, on day 5. Like, how do we stay sharp? How do we stay moving? And that became something that we started to talk about as a discipline of becoming a competitive adventure racing team, like honing that mental skill of keeping that edge when teams are passing you, when, you're falling behind, when you miss a cutoff, when somebody in your team is falling apart and not able to go fast anymore. For us, particularly interesting because we had 2 teams in the race. Our other team, the 4-hour fuel team, they were the team that got to pick their A team, if that makes sense. Right. Mm-hmm. So already a bit, we were on the back foot. I knew that I wasn't going to get chosen for the A team just based on my age, my hip replacements, my kind of foot speed. But so we started off kind of on this idea of like, well, we're the underdogs. This Bend racing squad of just the 4 Bendites, certainly Chelsey and Dan are incredibly strong, but a lot of us was just kind of reframing this idea of what our mental race was going to be like, how we were going to help each other and being able to set lofty goals and also maintain them it would have been really easy for us to kind of make a few mistakes, get set back, and then stop competing and just say, okay, this is where we're at, like go other team. a lot of our early mental work was shaking off that stigma of being team B, if you will, right? And I don't know if you paid attention to it, but a lot of the write-ups early, Nick, like about predictions and like here are the strong teams, every single one of them, and there were a number of them, put this team, the bend racing team that got fifth, well behind the other team. Like the prediction was like, Jason's too old. They're not fast enough on foot. They've got a good paddling team, but, and so we're reading all these things before the race, right? Which is kind of a weird thing to be reading about your chances by the adventure racing expedition pundits and then having this chance to either buy into that story or to overcome that story or to write your own story. And so I think, I have some questions for you too, because you guys had, kind of a similar, moving in, you've always been this team that's kind of been mid-pack, but to kind of come out of, with this team format and to really achieve at a high level must have been an interesting thing for you guys. But we just spent a lot of time, me personally, allowing that story to propagate because I also like being the underdog. Right. And personally, if I put too much pressure on myself, given my physical limitations, it's easy for me to start to get into a negative feedback loop. And so I kind of, have spent a couple years letting those stories, not holding on to them and almost knowing they're these falsehoods. It's very easy for me to present myself as the old slow guy on Team Bend Racing that if we win, it's because the other teammates pulled me along the whole time. Right. And that's fine. I have purposefully propagated that because it takes a little bit of the pressure off of me and allows me to deal with my hip replacements, my limitations in a more, I guess, constructive way, right? So that when I overcome them, I feel great. And when they happen, I don't feel like I'm failing.
That's something that most athletes have is a feeling going into a race of anxiousness, nervousness, or excitement, right? And so a lot of this leading in weeks prior is because of just how pivotal of an event it is, right? And so a lot of that drives from kind of like the ancient limbic system that you have in your body. So your amygdala is kind of that sensor that's always processing in the subconscious background of scanning for threats. And so in this case, when it comes to, sport performance, threats are perceived the same way, whether they're real or imaginative, right?
Yep.
So if you see a lion, that's a real threat. But if you envision a lion there because of a, loud bang or something like that in the shadow, it's the same thing, whether it's real or not. Yep. And so often when the amygdala, when we're coming into these big events or just events that we perceive as big, those fears that we're going through, sometimes it's fears of performance, fears of other people's opinion. It's fears of, how are we going to do in this event or putting expectations that we may not achieve. And so those are some of those fears that are happening. And that really triggers kind of like your hypothalamus and some of the other areas of your brain to send that cascade we talked about in the HRV, the autonomic nervous system. Yeah. And so that's really driving that autonomic nervous system into that fight, flight, freeze kind of side. And what's neat though is that the same thing for anxiousness is the same exact areas and triggers that are happening for excitement, right? So if you're excited, you're going the same way. So then when it comes to your prefrontal cortex, where you're actually cognitive thinking, that can have such an impact on it because now we're taking all those feelings that are happening subconsciously and we can rewrite the narrative on what's going on. And so we can write that as, I'm excited. This is a huge opportunity that I'm looking at or I'm going to take advantage of, or I have the opportunity to do something versus I'm afraid of failure, right? And so that's kind of like the will of success versus the fear of failure are just two different concepts that all stem from that same thing, right? And so I think a lot of what, top athletes are doing in that preparation, there's several things in the preparation that are going on, but it's really just cognitively, how are we shaping our mental aspect going into the event or going into the performance to be positive and maximize our performance, even though all this physiological stuff that's happening in the background is happening to everybody. But who can harness it, who can channel it, who can create these constructive ways of using it and employing it versus things that are self-destructive. So you mentioned, positive self-talk is setting goals, right? Are we setting external goals of we want to be X place that we can't control, or are we setting process-oriented ones, right? We want to make sure that we're moving together, we're towing, we're cross-loading, or we're spending only X amount of time in transition, we're eating X number of calories, like things that are process-oriented that we can control. And now those are the wins that we're hitting. So I think those are just some kind of like to put some background in the holistic of applying the art is the hard part. So I guess, you're talking a lot about the art aspect of it, which is the most important, right? And so I guess going into it, I mean, for us, we kind of looked at a lot of the process oriented, but sometimes those conversations can be what I've noticed with a lot of teams and teams I've coached is, if I hop in on a team call with them and I'm just observing what they're talking about going in, it's a lot of like buzzwords and we're going to help each other and this and that, but they don't get into the nitty gritty of like, what does that look like? How do you need help? How do you communicate that? What do you need, right? What does some of that
And
look
these
like?
these are, Dan and I have had a lot of, conversations. I think we did a podcast a while back on the Bend Racing podcast where we're really looking at that same thing, this idea that in the pre-race conversation, like the possibility is endless. Like everybody's happy. Nobody imagines that they're going to be the one that bonks, right? And so there's all the conversation, the flowery words, the buzzwords, like, oh, we're going to help, and this is how it's going to work. But, I think one of the things people don't talk enough a lot about that we've learned is we can all try to be helpful, but we have to be cognizant of also sometimes the way that we help or the way that we approach things could actually negatively impact somebody on the team, even though we're trying to be helpful. Really good case in point. This is the best it's worked on our team because I was able to identify that when I'm hurting, right, one of the worst triggers for me is somebody on my team, like, if they're ahead of me or they're running, especially if my wife or Daniel, because they're like the closest people in the world to me, like turning around and saying like, are you okay? And we've been able to have this conversation where I'm like, I'm okay. I'm just not quite as fast as you. I will tell you if there's something that you can do, but like, this is my speed and I feel great, but like, there's that tone that would basically be saying, hey, is there any way we could go a little faster? But the way it comes across is like this look over the shoulder, like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, this is my mountain running speed. And for me to identify and be able to tell the team that is really annoying to me and it sets me off on this negative path, right? So even if they accidentally do it, then I can be like, hey, remember that's not helpful right now. Yes, I'm doing great. I don't need you to take my pack because even if you take my pack, I'm not going any faster. This is just my leg speed, right? And so there were these moments in the race where that happened and it resolved much better than it ever has, right? And the other thing that has been interesting, especially with the people that know me the most, is like, hopefully nobody on this listening to this podcast has two artificial hips, except maybe my twin brother who also has two artificial hips. Like, it sucks. Like, I'm not going to like, it sucks to run. It's metal on metal. Like, you have no cartilage anymore. You're not supposed to get hip replacements and run, 60K. Like, it's just not a thing that people do, except it's possible. And so when I run long distances, especially with a pack on harder roads, it inevitably leads to a much more painful running experience than I can imagine anybody continuing to run during. But I'm used to it. I know it's there. I'm okay with it. It just sucks, right? And so part of that conversation is letting the team know when I'm in that pain, right? And that I'm managing it. But the expectation that they do something to make the pain go away is non-realistic, right, in a race environment. And so they've had to work to like see somebody that they love and their teammate in pain, but also like twist their head around the fact that it's my choice. If I think that there's anything they can do about it or if anything needs to be done, that we'll do it. But, like there's nothing worse than as an athlete having somebody on your team look at you with pity in their eyes. Like that is, like I'm choosing to be there. No, like I'm not doing anybody a favor by being on the team. I'm not filling in for a spot that they couldn't race without somebody. And I feel like I'm now like, I want to be there. Right. So, for me, we had a lot of conversations and it was amazing to see them look at me as an athlete this race and as a team member, as a valuable team member instead of in the past, it's been a struggle when you're sleep deprived and somebody turns around and you was like, looks at you with that pity in their tone or in their eyes. And that's a really hard thing for me personally, because that's not what I'm asking for. Like, I imagine, I imagine that's, the people that have disabilities that like, when you hear them talk, they're just like, I just want to be treated like a normal human. right?
Right.
And helped in a way without the conditional, like, poor you,
Yep.
right? And so, yeah, I can accept the help. I can accept, like, hey, should we slow down? Do you need some, pain meds? Do you, like, what can we do? But when there's the pity involved, and that's what was great. Like, we were just this team that was all connected.
Exactly. And that's where different people respond differently to different types of help or verbal cues, et cetera.
Right.
So, I would say I'm thinking really there's two very experienced expedition racer females I've raced with in the last year, right? One was Chelsey Johannesson, phenomenal, big mountaineer, bunch of expedition races. The other was Caitlin Thorne, who we just raced with. And when they're in the pain cave, they have two completely different ways that they receive help, right? Chelsey wants to be left alone, right? Like, don't even turn around and look at her. Like, she's there, just let her go. She's going to grind it out, right? You take weight or cross load, but like, she doesn't want positive self-talk or anything. She's just like, I'm here, let me go, right? Caitlin, on the other hand, is different, right? Caitlin, you can turn around and be like, hey, you're crushing it. I know you're in pain. You're super strong. You can say those positive things, and she lights up and she responds and she pushes harder, right? And so having those talks with them prior or during sometimes the race and figuring it out is super critical. And same thing for yourself. When you're in the pain cave, what do you need? For me, like, if people say positive things, that's good for me. That helps me mentally to keep pushing, right? And so that's kind of where I feel like some people don't have that understanding of themselves because they just haven't been there enough, or they don't communicate it. And so, for you guys with Ben, you guys have been racing together, living near each other, training together for years. So it seems like you guys have that really dialed in. Whereas I feel like most teams out there, most don't have that experience, right? The top level teams have been racing for a while, but I'd say most teams haven't had that many races over and over and over together to where that's really dialed in. And I feel like that often makes a huge difference, is understanding how do we take and receive communication feedback, especially when we're in those vulnerable positions.
Yeah. And to add a level to this that often, like, my clients and a lot of people don't think about is, it's one thing to have those conversations, to have the awareness, which is super important. Like, what do I need? How do I respond when I'm hurting, right? When I'm feeling like I wish I was stronger, or I'm letting my team down, or I'm just physically in the pain cave. But we can identify how we want to be helped and let our teammates know that. But the tricky thing with expedition racing, which to me makes it so fascinating, is for some people, those triggers, or the way they need to be helped or can help, change dramatically when you add sleep deprivation. Because a lot of us turn into different people when we're severely sleep deprived. And this is what's been fascinating with my wife, Chelsey, right? Like, the way she can accept help or help people, when we're trying to be competitive and all that stuff, changes dramatically if it's after a sleep, or when sleep deprivation isn't a big part of our psyche, versus if we've been going 30 hours without sleep. Like we become different people. Like, and there's all these fun studies that show that, but it's often harder to recognize who we are and it's been years, like, case in point, like, Dan and I sometimes race really well together, but often when there's other people around, we annoy each other so much, right? And what it's taken us years to realize, if it's just the two of us, we're like best friends on these big paddling races. But in this, adventure racing environment, there's the easiest way to describe it is like, sleep deprived Jason gets so annoyed specifically at sleep deprived Dan. When Dan is sleep deprived, the way he wants to solve problems in the moment is like, talk about them ad nauseum, right? To me, it doesn't make any sense anyway, right? And like, when I'm sleep deprived, it feels like, but it's only the sleep deprived personalities. So like, the sleep deprived Dan and Jason really have to kind of understand that, or at least we need to recognize that, when we're really sleep deprived, we can derail each other very, very easily as teammates. But after we've slept, or like when everybody's feeling good, like it's a very different thing. And so there's like, we have to manage multiple personalities sometimes within a race, depending on where we are in our cognitive and mental capacity and emotional capacity, right? I'm excited in a second to bring Chelsey on, because she has this massive capacity, like this super deep emotional reserve and intelligence as a racer, that goes from probably the biggest on our team to, at times, absolutely the smallest on our team, right? When she gets sleep deprived. And to see her tools for dealing with that, I think has helped a lot of us on the team. One of the stories that I tell in God Zone, kind of on our early, really competitive things, the big God Zone in Fiordland, which was probably one of the hardest races on the planet at that time, we were doing unsurprisingly well. And we were in the top 10, which an American team had never been in. And we were close to the last stage. We're falling apart. And we decided to sleep on these boulders in a horrible spot. We were going to sleep for 30 minutes and then push on to the finish. And we didn't even realize how sleep deprived we were. We went to sleep. I have a really hard time falling asleep. So I'm laying there. And then maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes in, Chelsey wakes me up. She shakes me awake. And I'd probably just fallen asleep. And she's like, I'm a bad person. And I'm like, what? She's like waking me up in the middle of the night in our 30-minute sleep. She's like, I'm a bad person. Like, what are you talking about? She's like, I'm a bad person. I'm a bad mother. The family will be better off without me. I'm just going to wander off into the New Zealand mountains and disappear, and you'll never see me again. Like, everybody will be happier without me. And I'm just like, what is going on? Right. And she's like, no, seriously, like, I've been thinking about this. Like, I'm just a bad person. I'm too competitive, and that led us losing this place and like the kids and all this thing. And I'm just like, what is going on? Right. And she goes on for 3 or 4 minutes about disappearing into the New Zealand wilderness and never being seen again. And so I stay awake. I'm just like, no, you need to go back to sleep. Like we'll talk about this later. And she falls back asleep. I, of course, can't sleep now because, the person I love most in the world is right next to me and threatening to like disappear. So I stay awake. And then, 15, 20 minutes later, like, she wakes up with a start and is like, oh my God, we overslept our alarm. Let's go. And like, no recollection at all. Right? Like, super competitive, like super like, is anybody hurting? I'll carry weight. Let's go. Let's push. Like, we're so excited. We're going to finish today. Like, and I'm like, what just happened? Right? Like, how, and so that was the first time I really started to like clue in and do research on these essentially like bodies of personality that come with waves of sleep deprivation, and we're not getting enough sleep. And so it really has become fascinating to look at, like, what were some of your highs and lows and tricks for your team?
One thing is when you're looking at, so what we do is it's raw, intense, and emotional, right?
Yeah.
And so when we're in those environments and we're going through the slug, a huge thing is just when you start to feel aggravated, because everybody gets points where they're a little frustrated, aggravated, whatever. I think it's self-reflecting on like, okay, how tired am I? Have I eaten? Am I hydrated? Like those kind of quick check-ins. And I feel like often scanning those, you're like, I'm fucking starving right now, right? If you aren't eating enough or whatever. And sometimes those are easy ways to just cognitively just check in with yourself.
Wait, I just have to stop you there, because what you said is the most important parenting advice I can give to anybody. When your kids or you like get frustrated with each other, you're either hungry or your kids are hungry, tired, or thirsty. Right? Yeah. Which is brilliant, because basically your racing becomes racing with toddlers at some point. So carry on.
Or with marriage, right? Don't have an argument when you're hungry.
Exactly.
Yeah, for us, our sleep was pretty dialed in as far as when we were sleeping, and we slept decent. For us, we struggled, I think, on the Carpenter Lake paddle. One boat was faster than the other. We had a flat bottom, self-bailer, and one was continuously getting up, and that caused some tension in the team, right? So we're looking at, we'd been awake pretty straight for like 30 plus hours, and we're at night on a paddle that's just kind of mind numbing, and then it's just a slow drifting, right? And so I think there was where the team got a little bit heated on the two boats, and instead of doing the easy thing, which is let's just go on tow and hammer, it turned into a little bit of like a back and forth, which it shouldn't have. So I think for us, like, that's kind of one area where we just should have kind of like took a pause and been like, okay, let's identify the issue, take a deep breath, and then just kind of move forward together. I think another area where we had sleep deprivation really creep in was there was twice with Caitlin, right? So she's pushing extremely hard, like harder than anybody, a cross-loaded weight, but even with it, like, we needed to cross-load more, right? So she's burning out to where when we're at the edge of where we need to sleep soon, she's like pretty much holding her as we're walking to get to where we're looking for some shelter to go lay down. And she's barely conscious and just kind of like moving forward through the sleep depth. And the pace of the team drops when that happens, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that's kind of where we saw that on the first big trek, not the Sephora Lakes, the big one.
Yeah.
And then after, hour and a half down, it's like, okay, we're up, ready to go, moving. We might have done 3 there. I don't remember. But then it's like, man, the pace is just double, right? And then the other time that happened was on the KVR trail, that final bike leg. Going in, we were going to sleep an hour and a half at the hut for the
Yeah.
final O track and then push in, right? So that was the plan for the previous couple hours. When we get there, there's a couple other teams that are there still on the trek. So team captain made the decision to cut the sleep down. So we get a quick sleep, go out, and we actually really well there. We saved a bunch of time by just being super accurate and on point, whereas other teams were pushing the sleep and they were struggling, right? So they took an extra like 30, 45 minutes on the trek compared to what we did. So then as we're pushing, a couple hours later, we're heading in and it's just that darkness middle of the night. And because we'd shorted sleep, you're looking at, we only got 1 hour of sleep over the course of like 50 hours, right? And so at that point, it's just where the wheels are falling off. So to the point that like we can't put her on tow, right? And so it turned into a safety thing. So it's like, I called the stop, we stopped, and we did just 30 minutes, right? And then we pop back up. All of a sudden, we're going twice as fast, and we push the rest of the race, right? And so I think that's kind of where, for us, the sleep was, in that situation, there were two things. One is we deviated our plan because of what we saw other teams around us doing, which is kind of, it's a mix of tactical and emotional.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the emotional.
Yeah, tactical and emotional, right? Like, is that a tactical decision or an emotional impulse? Like, gray area, right? Tomato, tomato. And then from it later is, okay, we've now hit the breaking point. We need just that 30-minute nap, right? And that 30 minutes, popped up and pushed the rest of the race to the finish line, right?
Yeah.
And moved twice as fast. So there's also that aspect of the sleep part on the mental performance of, besides those other areas, is just, if you can sleep enough, you're going to move faster, even a little bit sometimes. And so it's often looking at the diminishing returns of, instead of push, when do we need to take that quick tactical sleep in order to then move faster as a team? And so I think those were kind of the critical sleep areas that we had on the team that I can think of. Everything else, we did good sleeps. We did like 3-hour sleeps. We did sleeps before hitting the big alpine trek. Before that bushwhacks, we maximized daylight in there. We did the big bushwhack down at night, the one from whatever that top lake was on that, the final 4K, because that doesn't matter, right? Like, we're literally heading down a huge re-entrant, shit everywhere, like, you don't really need to see. So I feel like we maximized daylight and sleep really well over the whole race. We just had some tension in the beginning on that paddle, the first 40 hours in or whatever, I can't remember. And then the final bit was, that area where we just needed to do like a safety stop, get down for 30 minutes, and all of a sudden the pace doubled. And with doubling the pace, we made up that time within like an hour, hour and a half. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things you said that I think is interesting and I want to add to is those small sleeps can increase the pace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easy for us to think that that's because the rest lets us perform better physically. But, at least in my sleep deprivation research, I've come to the conclusion that it is true that the pace increases, but mostly the pace increases because it allows your mental body to reset. And we all know, like they've shown again and again in research, that when you're happy and doing something, you do it more effectively. Like, anger is not a great tool for anything but maybe sprints or boxing, right?
Yeah.
Like, when you're actually enjoying what you do, believe in what you're doing, and are aware of the joy that you're taking into these moments of athleticism, when you're super tired and when you're looking around, like, that's when you perform better. And so this idea, like, they've done enough like sleep deprivation research where the physical activity, like, it goes down, but they're starting to attribute a lot of that physical activity going down to, again, that lack of competitiveness, the lack of sharpness in the mind, the lack of joy, the lack of those positive cognitive emotions that are driving the physicality. And so when you have somebody, you may be able to drag them along like a zombie, but when the joy goes out of what you're doing, right? Because it just disappears. Like, you just don't have those emotions anymore. Like, they're gone. Like, the more sleep deprived you get, like, when they do these studies, the less actual emotions are firing in your brain. Like, we have this broad spectrum of like these million subtle emotions that we feel as a human if we really clue into them. And then the more and more sleep deprived we get, those become simply the base things, right? Until almost like when you look at these studies of people doing 11 days of sleep deprivation, they become emotionless, right? They become reactive, right? And the emotions that they have are more like despair or paranoia, which aren't really emotions. They're like these kind of psychotic breaks. And so, a 30-minute nap doesn't do a lot to repair you physically. Like, when they, like you kind of need these bigger stages.
It's a mental drain. They literally will watch the mental chemistry drain out.
Exactly, right? And so these short naps can go so far into increasing, like resetting the cognitive space of the brain and the ability to have these happy thoughts, these cognitively robust thoughts. And it's amazing because that's really, I think, that stage 1 and 2 sleep that comes in that first 30 minutes is amazing for doing that, right?
Mhm.
But you're not really getting muscular repair. You're getting
Nope.
the of, it's almost like your RPE, like your perceived exertion goes down, but like it's not really doing anything to repair the muscles, like replenish any glycogen. None of that's happening, right? Mentally, the mind is such a driver of the physicality, especially late in these races, that I think that those are great things for people to know. Like short naps early don't seem to make that big of a difference. Short naps late can make a world of difference. For me, it's always like if I'm on day 5 and I can remember that I'm out there by choice, that's a good thing. I'm like, this is awesome. Can I bring Chelsey on? Because she does more kind of mental preparation than anybody on our team in the lead up. So can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, you're mostly a mental athlete right now.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right. So going into this, what does your mental preparation look like prior to the race and then things during the race? I guess those are kind of the two themes we're looking at.
Yeah.
And we're looking, I guess, more individual, and then maybe later we'll talk about team and group.
Right. Yeah. So before the race, I do a lot of mental prep. Well, in my everyday life, it's just a habit that I do. It helps me with parenting and with training and like keeping focus. And so I do meditation work most every morning.
Just like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, just 10 minutes a day. And I do it through an app. Right now, I'm doing the Waking Up app, and I love it. I love just how it sets me up for the day. And it really gives me a chance to kind of just observe where I'm at for the day and just have no judgment on it, but just like kind of take note of it. And so that when things do come up throughout the day, because inevitably it will, rarely ever do we have a day that like lines up perfectly. And so when I do get those side hits of the day, I can kind of like take them in and take a breath before reacting. That's what I'm really trying to work on over the last couple of years, is not doing reactive training, reactive parenting, reactive anything, just
reactive racing.
Reactive racing, yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how I set myself up just in a daily practice. And then leading up to this race, I know myself very well and what happens to me in expedition racing and what happens to me as a sleep-deprived person, and that can really only come from doing it so many times. And yeah, I heard Jason tell the story about God Zone, and that's also kind of like where I really saw it, because we were pushing really hard. We had pushed hard before this race, but we were in the top 10 of God Zone, which was huge back in the day. And before that, we had done a lot of Patagonia races, but Patagonia, you don't really get sleep deprived because you sleep 6 hours. You have to sleep 6 hours every night because the bush is so dense and navigation is hard. And so after that race, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even really remember that. I faintly remember saying that to Jason, but like I don't feel that way at all right now. And that was the next day. I was like, I woke up and I wanted to push. I was like, let's get out of here. And I was back to my normal everyday self. But since then, I really became fascinated, like Jason, in this other altered Chelsey. That's been my struggle with for the last couple of years, is like, I really don't like her. I hate her. And I
Do you have a name for her? So
I
like
don't
for
have a
me,
name for her.
yeah,
You
for
have a
me,
name?
I'm Nick, but when I have like negative self-talk, I'm
Yeah.
Nicolette.
Nicolette.
Yeah, I shared that with the football team, so they got a hoot out of it. We're doing a
That's good.
rushing them one day for more like mental resilience, right? We did our lifts, and then it was just a crush of a day just to break them down and kind of build up their mental side. And I shared with them that. And so then like that's kind of a thing that they still reference, is like, are you effing Nicolette, or what are you doing? Like to each other, they say that. Was kind of funny. So.
I think that would help a lot. I think naming your alter ego that you don't like,
Mm-hmm.
And
because we all have parts of us. Like, we're not just one-minded person, one focus. We have many parts that come out. I mean, throughout the day, I have parts of myself when I'm like tired or hungry that come out, and I need to like take a step back and like, okay. So yeah, I like that a lot. And we have talked about naming naming them like a little person. I remember
Yeah.
one teammate had that little person. I forget who that was. Maybe it was Lars or something, but because it came out in Spain too when we were pushing hard with Darren, our off the couch teammate that year, and he had some struggle, so we were all like making up things that would help him. But anyways, yeah, so before the races now, I kind of like let my team know what happens, especially to people that I haven't really raced with that much and know me as like a super strong, always smiling, like pushing Chelsey. I'm like, wait a second, there is this other person that comes out around day 2, especially, and she will say out loud, especially if I'm really comfortable with the team, I will say, this is my last expedition race. I am never doing this again.
I hate this.
I hate this. Why am I doing this? But I'm going to try to enjoy this because it's my last one. Seriously, this is my last one. And I will say that verbatim on day 2, like no doubt. Every expedition race. Like it will come out. Because I become this like depressed, naming, nagging, like I want to know what's going on in the navigation. I want to be a part of it, but I don't like it. And, I am just like everything of a bad teammate. And so this race, I said it out loud that I would do this, but I tried to really keep it inside because I knew that when she did come out in this race specifically, Jason and Dan they were in like code purple of our navigation. We have a green, yellow, red.
We invented purple.
Like navigation of like, okay, on the green we can go fast and we're good, but if they say yellow, we kind of have to slow down and look or like give them space. And red is like hard stop. We might need to like go back or we're lost.
Purple's ludicrous speed.
Purple, they developed new.
Purple is the maps suck. It's like we've gone beyond red. And we're mad because the maps aren't good and we're going to have to try something crazy so that we don't have to retrace our steps. And we're all frightened by it, excited. Like, it's just a mess.
Yeah.
But we're still pushing. Like we got to push it because we're going to miss cutoffs or like purple's the gamble.
This is like our last thing.
And we got to be on it and we got to work together. And we got to all take responsibility for the disaster that's about to happen if it doesn't work.
Yeah. Which
Where
really
was this in the race?
Huh? The first time it happened was checkpoint. I think it was 20.
It was on the first big trek.
Yeah, those maps were shitty.
After we reached the lookout and we were looking for the eastward turn and there were just so many roads and we're heading northwest and we know we don't need to keep heading northwest. And, our only sure bet was to go back to the lookout because there were so many roads and it was the middle of the night for us. And then we just decided to just bushwhack and find the random road going east and hope it connected to dropped elevation and connected to the thing. So it was brilliant.
It was brilliant.
Scary because that was our first taste of the 1 to 50,000 unmapped roads. And luckily that set us up well for the purple getting to checkpoint 40 on China Ridge.
Yeah.
Where there was that other big unmapped road and the really hard to find trail. And we just also went back to purple.
Mm-hmm.
So it was cool.
Yeah, we were in the same situation in both of those. And at one point we're like, hey, stop. The terrain is not matching. In the last 20 minutes, it's not matching up anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we're somewhere in this 2x2 grid square and we think we're here-ish. And then we get the whole team around and like over the next hour, we figure it out and we're back on and we're moving. This is off. Like, what are we going to do kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. But so that's when she was in that.
Yeah, I was deep in that. But that kind of pulled me out of it a little bit because I was like part of it, and I was like, oh, this is kind of exciting, So, but yeah, just going into the race, knowing that part of me was going to come out.
In a nice way, we just ignore you got to give yourself a name like Chelsey Prime or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
We just ignore it because there's nothing like for us to waste time trying to satisfy this person that is saying it's their last race. We just be like, great.
Yeah.
Let's enjoy your last race. Done.
Yeah.
Like, you're totally fine. This is your last race. Thanks for doing this one with us.
Yeah.
And we don't like try to convince her to do more races or say you don't really feel that way. We're just because.
Yeah, the more they try to fix it and the more it takes away from the team, like the worse it gets for me.
And we just all slow down and we all get depressed. And so we're just like, sweet, last race for Chelsey. Let's go. Let's make it count.
Yeah, let's make it a good one,
Mm-hmm.
And then when I wake up for that next day, I feel great. And, I'm like back to pushing and everything. So, we're races where I'm really pushing and we're kind of like, we slept a lot on this race. So that was nice. But, when it always comes up because inevitably you're not sleeping until like 30, 35 hours on that first day. So it's like she's going to come out and I just have to give her space to come out. And like, I don't know what happened to me in a past life or like as a child, but like, she's a part of me. And the more that I just let it out and listen to her and give her space and not judge her, then the easier it is, it goes away. And then inevitably day 5, if we're still out there, I get emotional and highly like holding on to wherever we are at in the race, like competitively. And it doesn't last too long. And if I can harness that and turn that into like pushing harder if I can, or like taking more weight, because usually I'm still in the race, but at a maybe not so healthy competitive. I'm like emotional and I'm highly competitive, which is not really good. It's not a good mix. And so this race, I was able to cry, and that really helps. Like that release, I cry every expedition race. I have a big cry and I don't know when it's going to come. This one, it was attached to like a competitive, like we were coming out of the mountains and I had just spread Spirit B on top of Llama Peak, which is also highly emotional for me. And I always try to pick a place where eventually we can take the boys. And so there was a trail to it, and like it was a beautiful vista, and we had gotten there at sunrise. It was awesome. And I cried a bit, but we all had a feeling that we didn't quite know where we were coming out of the mountains. Like we could either have been like fallen way down,
Yeah,
or
we thought we had a pretty bad trek.
Yeah, we thought we were had a
So
bad.
hard to tell on those monster treks.
Yeah, and we couldn't see anybody in front of us or behind us. And then we came out and we saw a photographer, and he let it slip that sardines were looking strong, and
they'd
they
passed
had
us.
passed us, and I just let it out. Like it was nothing against them or us. It was just like I needed to cry, and I just got this like anxious, overwhelmed feeling of where we were, but I knew deep down that it was all going to be okay. And like this was just an irrational, like crazy, like reaction to it, that reactive racing. And so I just let it all out. And then at the bottom, we had a breakfast burrito at that food cart and a dirty chai, which brought me a little bit calm down. And then I just turned it into just a very fast power hike up that next mountain. And I was able to, within a half hour, turn it into something positive of like, okay, I'm just going to push and see. It's not done yet. There's a lot more race left. And wherever we end up, it's going to be awesome because we've done so good.
We're learning, like you talked about, Caitlin and Shelly, and learning, especially your strong-willed, or super competitive teammates. Chelsey's competitiveness has helped us a lot over the last years, and now we're learning that when she gets in those negative emotional spaces because of, it's like the flip side of the coin. The competitiveness is super awesome. It really strives us. She pushes us a lot, keeps us moving.
Yeah, I'm a good pacer when it's good.
And then when it falls apart, like
it's horrible.
It's almost worse for us to try to do anything about it, or to try to, because it's irrational, and she knows that. We all know that. But if we spend resources and emotional energy trying to make Chelsey Prime feel good about things, like we're wasting resources that we should be saving for a time when we're all burning our matches together. Right. So she's burning this emotional match, right, of despair. And we can either spend all our time trying to reason with somebody that is literally unreasonable at that point. Right. Mm-hmm. Because she knows that this is a race. It's long. Just because a team passed us, right? We don't know where we are. We don't know anything. Right. And so you can imagine all these things. Oh, we suck. We're going too slow. Everybody else found a better route than us, and we took the slowest route. Why did we do that? You can do that. Right. But that's not helping anything. Like, and we know that. And now it's great. We're just like, let her off the front. Like, she can cry, she can yell, she could be angry, and let that match of despair burn out. Like, just let it burn out, because it's not a useful match, right? Mm-hmm. And then there'll be other matches to light, because again, the one thing I learned years ago in Vipassana, which Vipassana is like this 10-day meditation retreat. I did a lot of that in my youth, is that everything changes, right? Especially like everything changes. Nothing stays the same. And so sometimes we just have to let these phases burn out if there's not very much that we can do about them, and not, you don't always have to be happy. You don't always have to try to make everybody happy in the moment or satisfy what they're going through, especially if that's not really possible.
Yeah, some of the metacognition phrases are taking it from I'm slow or I'm tired or I'm this and changing it into I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling slow, I'm feeling
Yeah.
this, because it's separating the emotion from you as the being and the person, right? So
Mhm.
now like your self-esteem, self-efficacy, like your value is separated from the emotions, which it sounds like you're very good as a team and as an individual of separating like, oh, okay, she's feeling this and mentally going through this right now, but that's
Mhm.
different than who she is
Right.
and the value she brings to the team. And so, and you've also figured out kind of how to give space. That's huge, because I feel like there's times where you see in teams, sometimes you're passing other teams and whatnot, and you see somebody struggling or different things, and you can see like negative self-talk on the team or just different interactions that aren't like exactly positive. And sometimes it's almost as if everybody has the highs and the lows, but sometimes when someone's having a low, it's looking upon them as a person as being not enough, as opposed
Mhm.
to, no, they're just going through this because, I don't know, we're in the middle of a 550-mile race or whatever, you know what I mean? And
Right.
everybody hits that. So I think sometimes having that empathy and sympathy, but also having the ability to compartmentalize it and understand it and just kind of
Yeah.
accept it, right? That
Mhm.
accepting point of moving forward. So, for me, I would say a big deal breaker for me and teammates that I found is if somebody makes irrational decisions because they're emotional, and especially in consequential or potentially consequential environments, is a huge red flag.
Mhm.
So like, how do you guys handle on the team as different people are entering the different emotional landscapes, making decisions and team decisions?
I mean, this is, part of it, I think, is, as you were talking about, is the recognition that we're all going to go through those emotional lows, right? And that's a necessity and a healthy part of what we are doing as expedition racers, which sounds weird because expedition racing is not healthy. Like, you know, in some ways, like physiologically, if we were to be studied by scientists, to be like, oh, what the hell are you guys doing? But also in the experiential level, like, it certainly is healthy in the fact that it's putting us in uncomfortable places that we have to overcome and learn from, right? And I think with every team, there is, I think they talk about the team makeup, but one of the, I will say one of my strengths as a teammate is exactly what you were talking about, right? I have a unique ability to be able to kind of maintain a perspective, even when I'm sleep deprived for the most part, even, you know, to have that. And that is kind of why I've been so effective over the years as a captain on a team, even if I'm not the fastest. I'm the old slow guy. I'm going to go back to that. I mean, I am the old slow guy. So anytime I'm racing on a team, people should expect to beat me. But I'm a good captain, right? And Dan is a brilliant navigator. Dan is growing as a captain, but there are times in this race too where I basically would say, this is something that needs to happen. And
Yes.
this is not effective. Like when he was navigating so well, when we'd get to these purple zones, and, I was essentially the one both times to recognize and saying, this is a tough situation. We need to take a step back, and this is what we're going to do. And we need to all agree that it's okay if it fails, right? And pull ourselves out of the kind of those fight or flight responses, this bigger picture, or if we need to sleep a little longer or whatnot. I used to do that because I was tired. Like I used to have all these captain skills of just being like wanting to be comfortable, right?
Yep.
And so like I could turn my pain or discomfort into a really rational reason for the team to sleep longer or to do something
You
different.
still kind of do that.
I don't do that. Now all I want to do
Sleep?
is finish.
Exactly. Yeah. And I have a very similar strength in being able to compartmentalize the emotions versus the cognitive decision. And a lot of that just comes from the military experience I have, special operations, like, just horrific things happening around you and having to make instant decisions on what's going on and then pick up the pieces of, the guys around you to continue on over and over again, having to make tough decisions in leadership roles with leading other people in those environments just makes it to where it's a lot easier just to turn off and compartmentalize and just kind of push through and think through, like separating the emotional from the cognitive spot to make those decisions. And I feel like that only really comes from a lot of time under a lot of stress in leadership roles. And my guess is that for you, you get better at it the more experience you have. And like you're mentoring Dan, it sounds like, and the more he goes through it in those roles, the better he'll get too.
I always say this to my clients, like you can be the most physically prepared, Like you can think all you need to do is train more and get faster, and then you're still going to hit these plateaus or these walls in this sport until you become all mentally trained, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until you do that and continue to work on both of them at the same time, especially at the top level of this sport. Really whatever. If you want to go from back of the pack team to middle of the pack to competitive, like
whatever threshold you want
whatever
to cross.
threshold you want to cross, a big piece of it is mental acuity, mental resilience, but it's like also the interrelationship, the personal relationship you have with your alter egos, how you present, how you make your team understand,
The concept that I have with mental toughness is you layer it on slowly over time, just like volume. So
Absolutely.
there's a breaking point, and the more uncomfortable and the more you get there over and over and over, the more you understand yourself and the further you can push it. When you're at these top ends of mental performance, you can push past points that are unsafe, right? So like you literally can push your body to the point that you're breaking your body in ways that other people wouldn't even come close to. And I would say the same thing like mentally is you can push yourself through being cold. Like you could probably physically push yourself to the point of being like moderate hypothermic out of control if you wanted to, right? And so I think there's also the experience that comes in of knowing I can keep pushing, but also what's the smart move in a multi-day race of how hard do we push before something bad happens, which I think's a whole different level. Like I think the first level is just building up over and over, pushing harder, harder, harder. And eventually either making mistakes or learning lessons or getting to the point to where like, and there's that tricky spot in that mental aspect of like, am I pushing too hard or am I just being a wuss? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And kind of dialing that in, I feel is very difficult. And then when you layer in the fact that, especially for the team captain, they're looking at them as an individual, but also at 3 other teammates that are out, you're in a super remote area where it's going to take 2 days to get out of there. What's your risk tolerance for you and the team? And can you recognize like, no, we need to stop and put a layer on, right? Or do we need to do this? I feel like there's a whole different level of it.
And the thing that I want to end with is a shout out to another special forces team, right? So guys that I host the Rainier Raid with, Andrew Voss, he came in as CrossFit for Vancouver, but he's a Navy SEAL. On that team was also a Navy SEAL. And then they got Summer, who's a newer expedition racer, but done a couple, but this is definitely her biggest. And a local guy from Bend named Micah, also done a little bit of racing, but this is a big, big race for them. And
for a lot of people.
Yeah, for a lot of people. But one of the most, mentally, I'm always very, very cognizant. I've trained a number of people that went the route of doing a big race, failing, choosing to drop out, and then coming back and saying, oh, I just need to tweak this. I just need to tweak that. Like I need more training, or I didn't train fast enough, or this training didn't work. To me, there's this mental aspect that we get to create neural pathways by the decisions we make out there in the field. So if things get really hard and we had a goal of top 20 and everything's falling apart and we still finish the race, right? Like I got, whether it's lucky or my mental resiliency was already there when I started this sport, I've DNF'd one race out of 85 expeditions, right? And that means a lot of them we finished last or we got short course, but the idea was that we find a way through whatever's in front of us and we finish, right? And I've just seen so many athletes that want to be competitive that continually drop out. And so like they're writing that pattern into their brain, right?
Exactly.
They're literally, when things get hard enough, and they always will get hard enough out there, then their default that's really hard to overcome eventually is I've dropped out of 5 races. Well, this is just a 6th. This is just a 7th. Eventually everything will come together and it'll work, right? And then, CrossFit for Vancouver went out there with a team that they kind of last minute put together. The 2 Navy SEALs had worked together, and they stopped at one point because Micah's feet were so bad and he was like literally about to drop out. And they remembered a piece of advice I gave them a long time ago, but they said, okay, you should be willing to stop with your team for 10% of the total race time before you pull the plug, right? Which in this is a 240-hour race, 220-hour race. Yeah. So they stopped for 15 hours. They stopped for 15 hours, which basically means they stopped racing. It's not even a hotel stay overnight. They stopped in one place for 15 hours, right? And hung out, just sat there, didn't make any decisions until they were like, well, we're going to sit here for up to 20 hours before we make a decision. 15 hours later, they're back on the course, right?
Yep.
And then they did it again at some other point for 9 hours, right? and they finished full course in their first World Championships, and it's super awesome. But he was sitting there with Micah saying like, look, dude, this is not the race you're defined by, but what we are defined by is what choices we make here. Like, you're going to have a long racing career. You're going to race better. You're going to race faster. You're not going to have these issues. But like, what do we want to do? Do we want to stay together as a team? Do we want to do everything possible in the scope of this sport? Because that's how it's defined. What team can make it across the finish line, right? And so I'm just super proud of him for that mentality to like take these things that would have been really hard, coming in with expectations and fitness and being derailed, and then still making choices again and again and again to serve their long-term goal as a team, which is to grow as better humans, to learn how to work together. And holy cow, I mean, it's just unbelievable. And, they finished full course, fully ranked in that huge thing. So, to me, that's this awesome, who cares what their physical training was? Like, their mental training went up a notch, and all Andrew's mentality served him super well in leading this team all together across the finish line through, so many setbacks. And, so that's a huge testament to that team and that mental work.
Exactly. You can reset expectations based on the circumstances you're in. Mm-hmm. And I love that the experience of the team is more important than the individual or just the perspective we're pushing, which is fantastic. And that's what adventure racing is about, right?
Yeah.
We're placed in very austere, extreme environments and tough situations as a team, and you need to work together as a team to figure it out. The World Championship, especially, you're pushing for the ranking and this and that. At the end of the day, I mean, you're out there for 10 days having experience with people that you're either close to or you're going to be close to, and prioritizing that presence is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, we're excited, and I know we'll get back into more of the kind of nitty gritty adventure race training stuff, but I think these were valuable conversations to have. So thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thank you guys. And, I think we'll do future calls where we'll kind of hop in the science more of it, but I think the experience is great. Like, we can deep dive sleep and the S drive and C drive. We can talk about MBSR, like mindfulness based stress reduction, and those kind of things, and studies and all those.
And paddling. And we got to teach people how to paddle via the podcast.
Yeah, all that stuff. So, but yeah, I thought this was excellent on talking through both individual, what does the pain cave look like? What does their self-talk look like? How do we work as a team? And just some of those kind of insights I think that we can offer racers to show that what it looks like at different levels, and also that they're not alone when they're encountering all this stuff as well, which is huge, because we're all dealing with these mental aspects of these crazy races in this awesome sport we do.
Well, thanks, buddy.
Yeah, thank you guys.